pleased to welcome Chris, is it Boucher? Boucher, that's how I was going to say it. Chris Boucher, author of Harry Bucky Lew, a biography of basketball's first black professional. And we actually have it in our collection you can check out. A lifelong basketball fan and resident of Lowell, Massachusetts, Chris hadn't heard of Lew until he started researching early basketball in his backyard. He was shocked to learn all his hometown hero had accomplished, and now hopes to get Lew his proper due. Today, Chris will present on Lew's trailblazing Chris will present on Lew's trailblazing legacy, 25-year career, which culminated in his final game in St. Johnsbury in 1926. Please join me in welcoming Chris Boucher.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for attending today. Quick audio check. Does the audio sound okay? Good. All right, perfect. All right, so yes, I am Chris Boucher. I'm here to talk about Bucky Lew, basketball's first black professional. I've actually written 2 books about Lew, so as you can imagine, I can talk and talk and talk about Bucky Lew. So please don't let me. So this will go much better if you feel free to interrupt me as I'm speaking with a question or an observation. It would be much better as a conversation than a lecture for both you and for me, believe it. All right, so with that, we'll get started. Talking about Bucky Lew and St. Johnsbury's role in the integration of early professional sports. So first of all, who was Bucky Lew? Well, he integrated both college and pro basketball by 1903, so that was quite a long time ago. He came to play in St. Johnsbury, became a marquee name up here in about 1907. And according to him, I have not found the documentation for it, but he did tell an interviewer late in life he played his last professional basketball game here in 1926. So that's of interest as well. And there on the slide, you can see the picture of Lew, along with an ad that appeared in one of the local newspapers. And if you can read it down the very bottom, it says, "Come and see the original Bucky Lew, who will be in the lineup for Company D," which was the local team. So any more about St. Johnsbury? Well, it was known as a hot town for basketball way back when, according to Lowell's Sun of 1903. Evidence for that is the fact that a team from Lowell was brought up here to play the local team and paid $150. So that's about $6,000 today. That's fairly significant. That would be about $1,000 per player, since the teams were very small in those days. Last quote I have on the slide: basketball in Vermont is a winter institution, and that appeared in the Portsmouth Herald in 1924. And these dates are of interest because basically this is the length of Bucky Lew's career. So he started in about 1902, finished in about 1926, and during that entire period of time, basketball was quite popular in St. Johnsbury. Also, Guy Abbott, who was born in St. Johnsbury and played college ball in Dartmouth, was also a player in the professional circuit in those days. He's actually rated by Ainsworth Sports as still the #1 pro basketball player in Vermont history. He played 2 years in the league that Lew played in, New England Basketball League, and he also was a teammate of his for a brief period of time. So just digging a little deeper into why Lew would come up to St. Johnsbury from Lowell to play, which is quite a distance, because I know I just drove it, and I'm sure I got up here a lot more quickly than he would have. So integrated sports really started way back in Vermont. Here we have a slide on Bud Fowler. He was playing in Vermont in 1887. That's a significant year in sports history, because that's basically when the color line was established. So Major League Sports agreed in that year, after some objections from some white players, that black players would not be allowed to participate. And it actually interrupted Fowler's season because he was playing in New York in a league with a minor league team that was affiliated with a major league team. So apparently he was no longer deemed eligible to play with it, so he came over to Vermont to finish out that season. He was a favorite of both the press and the fans. I have some quotes up there that I won't read to you unless you want me to, unless you can't read it. The takeaways there that he was well received by both the press and the fans, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And on the slide there, you can see the bust from his Hall of Fame induction. All right, so next up, we have Clarence Matthews. So he was also another black athlete who played baseball in Vermont. He played for a Burlington team in 1905. So that was an outlaw league, so they were defying the color line as it did not apply to them. There was a rumor way back in 1905 that after he finished his spell in Vermont, he was going to be signed by a major league team, thus challenging the color line. That did not happen. That may have been just something that was kind of planted to get some publicity for the team. Now, Matthews played his college basketball in Harvard. Interestingly, he did not make the southern trips for most of his career while he was playing for them. So if they went south of the Mason-Dixon line, he did not accompany them by Harvard's own choice. However, in 1905, his final season there, they switched things up and they hosted Vermont in Cambridge to start the season. So Vermont was part of that history too. Similar to Fowler, Matthews was well received in Vermont. Here we have another quote on the screen from the Burlington Free Press, talking about how the fans were happy to see him and had no issue whatsoever with his color. All right, and then we have Louis Sockalexis. So he's known as baseball's first Indian. He integrated professional baseball with the Cleveland franchise in 1897. He played baseball here as a visitor with Holy Cross, for sure, and perhaps as a professional too, because after he left the majors in 1899, he played on a number of minor league teams and may have come through the state as well. All right, so next I'll talk a little bit more specifically about Lew. Any questions or thoughts or observations so far on what I've presented?
How many teams actually were part of the leagues that circulated around here? Was there multiple?
So it varied a lot. So Vermont had a state league that we'll talk about in a little bit that had 3 teams. So not very much. You had St. Johnsbury, Springfield, and then Brattleboro. The New England Basketball League, which Lew integrated prior to that, had between 6 or 8 teams, kind of depending on how well the teams were doing in the cities that were hosting them. You also had other professional leagues outside of New England. There was one which called itself the National League, but was actually mostly Philadelphia in the suburbs that had about 6 or 8 teams. So there's really a lot of variability to it because the sport was new. And people were still trying to figure out, I guess, if they liked it or not, and so it's kind of hard for them to anticipate what kind of crowds, what kind of fans they would attract. So
Those would all circulate up and down the 3 cities?
So the players circulated a lot. Even the teams sometimes moved between cities if they saw some place where they may have been sold more tickets and better received. So there was a lot of variability to it. Yep.
About that, several of them that played college ball at Harvard. I mean, that surprised me. They
Yeah.
were integrated and they played on the sports team. And they got in because of the sports team, or?
So I don't know that. So as far as Charles Matthews goes, who played at Harvard, and was actually the captain of the team for at least this last year. I think he played football too. I believe he was a good student because he went on to become an attorney and had a pretty significant legal career too. So in terms of the sports of those days, so no one would be brought in necessarily just because of their sports skills, but it was certainly part of the program. And sports weren't necessarily what they are today in terms of college. They weren't necessarily making money for it. It was just kind of a healthy outlet for the students to participate in. So I think he got in because he could, not necessarily just based on his athletic skills.
Yeah, I just didn't know when Harvard and I think there was another, but anyway, when.
Holy Cross.
When they, that one.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
they integrated.
So I think they never segregated. So Jim Crow spread kind of after the Reconstruction failed, after the end of the Civil War, right? And that did reach pretty far into the North, but not everywhere. So New England was still open to black athletes and black students, for example. So Bucky Lew in Lowell was always part of an integrated community, whether it was church or school or the YMCA. That said, it wasn't the case everywhere. Boston schools were segregated, but there were many instances in New England where things weren't segregated, even though it did spread pretty far north, as I said, after Reconstruction failed.
Thank you.
Yep, good question. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more about Lew. So as I said, he integrated pro basketball in 1902. He did that with the Lowell team. There is a picture of the team that he played on. So his manager had signed him, apparently after some pressure from the local fans and the press, and actually was reluctant to play him in that first game. So the story goes that he signed Lew, but told him he was going to be an emergency sub and not to expect to play. So he was basically the sixth player that accompanied the team that game, and that was the extent of the players. Teams were very small in those days. So one of Lew's Lowell teammates was injured or re-injured during the warm-ups and was not going to be able to play. So the manager of the Lowell team tried to send out 4 players to play against the other team's 5. Now the game was in Marlboro, but about 50 Lowell fans took the train down with the team to watch it. And when they saw that only 4 of their players were going out to play against the other team's 5, in Lew's words, they almost caused a riot. So they really freaked out. They were not happy with the situation at all. And so the manager relented, and then Lew did get in the game. So he did play well, even though he had only signed for that one game as an emergency substitute. He did soon enough sign a contract, and he stayed with the team for the rest of that year. And you can see here's a picture. The caption might be a little bit hard to read, but the caption on it says Bucky Lew, a PAC star. So he was playing for the Pawtuckettville Athletic Club of the New England Basketball League. And we've got a quick quote on him too. He was also a fan favorite, and that says that he was an attraction in every city and town where he played. So that was big, him integrating pro ball in 1902, but he wasn't done yet. So in 1903, an item appeared in a Lowell newspaper identifying him as the coach of Lowell Textile School. And you can see that last line in the image that's on the screen, and it runs through in this item that's running through kind of an update on what Textile is up to. The last note there says, the coach of the team is Harry H. Lew of the PAC. So that is our friend Bucky Lew that we just talked about playing for the PAC. Now what's interesting about this is he's playing professional basketball and coaching college in the same year. So according to the basketball kind of calendar, seasons start in the fall of one year and they end in winter or spring of the next. So he's still playing for the PAC as he's coaching in college. So you might ask, how could he do that? Coaching was a little different in those days in that you actually couldn't address your players during the course of the game. So the coaching was done like before and after the game. The person who had the responsibility for addressing the players was the captain. So they had more of those coach-like responsibilities in those days. Also, Lew's family owned a dry cleaning establishment in Lowell, and that's where he worked. And I have the feeling that his workload was kind of light during basketball season, so he had a little more time to devote to things like this. I'm sure he made up for it after the basketball season was over. So this is pretty interesting history, though. So we do have Lew integrating both college and pro basketball by 1903, and the proof was in the papers. Now, Lowell Textile School, if it doesn't sound familiar, it has gone by a variety of names over the years, but it's currently UMass Lowell, which is Division I basketball school now. All right, so now moving into the next professional basketball season. Guy Abbott, who we spoke about a little while ago, is someone who was born in St. Johnsbury. He signs with the Lowell basketball team. And he shows up in town. There's a couple of articles about him, and one describes him as a gentlemanly appearing fellow. Now that might sound like an odd thing to say, but in those days, professional athletes weren't held in the highest regard. It was not, people had some question about it, about whether or not it was on the level. So there's a fair amount of gambling in sports in those days, and sometimes fans thought that athletes were making more money directing a result one way or another than just playing the game. So I think that's where that quote comes in. It's directed at that. Probably also a reference to the fact that he is a college man. As we mentioned, he went to Dartmouth. He also captained all of their sports teams, it sounds like, both baseball, football, and basketball during his time there. Now, of course, Lew is in Lowell too at that time. So he had re-signed with the Lowell team at the end of the previous season. And actually, we have a caption here which describes how Abbott and Lew both played together. So it might not be exactly clear there, but what's captured in the image on the screen is that there was a scrimmage where you had 8 Lowell players divided up into 4 teams. Abbott and Lew were on the Reds. The other team was the Blues, and the Reds, which was Abbott and Lew's team, won by a score of 18-6. So it looks like they played pretty well together that day. And of course, Abbott was not new to integrated sports. So we had talked about Clarence Matthews at Harvard. So Matthews and Abbott actually overlapped in 1902, and so they saw each other on the baseball diamond. So this box score references a game from 1902 where we have Clarence Matthews batting leadoff and playing shortstop for Harvard, and then we have Guy Abbott playing second base and batting second for Dartmouth. So this was not necessarily anything that was new. Abbott was the captain of Dartmouth, so he could have registered an objection to playing with Matthews, and it clearly did not. So we see way back in that early period, when Harvard was not willing to travel outside of New England with Matthews, Abbott and his teammates were perfectly willing to share a field with him. All right, then we have a little drama. So Lew ends up leaving Lowell shortly after that scrimmage. So here we have an account from a newspaper of the day talking about how Lew has gone to Haverhill and he's starting the season there, while Abbott is staying in Lowell and playing with that team. So one natural question would be, what happened? So we talked about James Gray, the Lowell manager, who kind of reluctantly signed Lew, and then was even reluctant to put him in the game in that first game. So he made him available to an expansion team that was joining the New England League in Haverhill. In his words, he loaned him out, but was able to get him back anytime that he could. Now, Lew really had nothing to say about this because he was under contract. So if he wanted to stay in professional basketball, he would have to relocate his professional kind of association from Lowell to Harvard. I do wonder why this happened. I do suspect that because, as we discussed, Lew was both identified as a star player in the newspapers, as well as coaching Lowell's college team, that he had become kind of, you might say, the man in Lowell basketball, and the Lowell manager may have resented that, and that may have been why he moved him along. That said, it worked out pretty well for Lew. So Haverhill is a super team. They become one of the 2 dominant teams in the New England League. Here is a picture of Lew with his Haverhill teammates. Most of these fellows are from New York. The tallest player in the back, Ed Wachter, is in the Hall of Fame. He's actually one of the few Hall of Famers from early basketball. Oftentimes, for whatever reason, the Naismith Hall of Fame doesn't lend a lot of credence to the accomplishments of the players from way back when, but he is one who got into the Hall of Fame. Of course, it's not easy. We've got some more drama. Here we have a picture of Harry Huff, who is the best player in basketball. He's for sure the best offensive player. He is from New Jersey, but he's playing for Natick. He's leading the league in scoring, and he also leads his teammates in trying to boycott Lew. So Haverhill and Natick were set to play in Natick. in Haverhill. It was actually a home game for Lew. Huff and his teammates took the court, but they would not participate in the game, they said, while Lew was in the floor. And in fact, the paper said the only time they moved was when Lew's teammates threw the ball at them and they had to dodge it to avoid being hit in the head. The crowd, as it was a home crowd for Lew, is not happy about this at all. Lew elects to sit. It sounds like perhaps that he did so to avoid that it turning ugly and maybe even there being a riot there. But it appears that he also had some inside information because the league did meet following this game, and they decided that they would remain an integrated league and that Huff and his teammates would be fined or expelled if they continued to do that. And it turned out that Lew had written a letter to the president of the league in the offseason after he heard some kind of grumblings about Huff and his teammates having issues playing with him, and the president of the league had assured him that they would stand with him. So this is kind of a big deal. So here we have 1905, the New England League has decided to remain an integrated league. Meanwhile, Major League Baseball is segregated and has been for years and would be for another 40 or so years. So the teams, as I said, are dominating the league. They're set to meet in the finals. This could be Lew's chance for revenge. However, as the finals are about to start, our old friend Jimmy Gray, who was Lowell's manager, Lew's manager in Lowell, somehow agreed to play a postseason series with Natick before Haverhill could play Natick. I had mentioned that most of Lew's teammates were from New York, so they just didn't want to wait out here a week and not be paid anything, so they decided to arrange some exhibition games. In one of these exhibition games, Lew dislocated his shoulder for the third time that year. He did appear in the finals, but he was not himself, and that probably contributed to the bad guys winning the championship that year. And here you have Huff and his teammates who won that championship. Then you might say it gets even worse. So I mentioned that Ed Wachter is in the Hall of Fame. So after the season ends, he gathers up most of the rest of the team and some other friends from New York. They go on a Midwestern tour. They end up beating Fog Allen's team, which was the team that beat the Buffalo Germans, who had won the 1904 Olympic trials. So now Wachter and his teammates have the right to call themselves the world's champions. Since it was no one league in those days, whoever had beaten whoever was thought to be the previous best team got to call themselves the world champions. So I have to think if Lew hadn't gotten hurt, he might have had a shot at both that New England League championship and world championship in that year. But as it was, he was not fit to go. He did not make the trip. The paper said after the season that his shoulder would not stay in place. He was just not fit for basketball. So that is unfortunate. So that wraps up the New England League. Professional basketball leagues didn't last long in those days. I'm sure the racial controversy didn't help. It also didn't help that Natick and Haverhill dominated the league. No other team in the league was above 500. The game was also beginning to be supplanted by college basketball in the public's mind, and so that kind of wrapped up the league. So here's kind of a summary of some of the things that Lew went through. As you can imagine, kind of a long list of injuries and indignities that he had to suffer through. That said, he kept his cool the whole time. One of his teammates said that as a Negro, at times the going was rough for him, but he never got ruffled or angry, and said that he remained a clean and skillful player. In an era when fistfights on the court were common, he never threw a punch in a game. All right, so then you might ask, well, what about Abbott? Well, Abbott actually didn't finish the season with Lowell. Late in the season, Gray released him and signed some other players. He signed on with another team in Lowell and finished the season with them. And after that, he called it quits. So there was some rumors that he was going to try to play professional baseball, but he did not. Instead, he relocated to the Midwest and went on to a business career there. All right, next I'll talk a little bit more about Lew's trip to Vermont, but any more questions or thoughts on what we've discussed so far?
Where did they play in Lowell?
Huntington Hall, which burnt down a long time ago, but used to be kind of opposite City Hall. So if you can picture Lowell opposite City Hall, there's some railroad tracks, and there's often a kind of a locomotive the era that just sits there. So way back in Lew's day, that was set up similar to North Station in Boston, where you had trains underneath and then an arena on top. And so they would hold about 2,000 for those games, and they would fill it when like Stars came through or the two Lowell teams played each other. All right, so now a little bit more about Vermont. So on the eve of coming up here, Lew gets married in December of 1906. Interestingly, the family says that he actually met his wife playing violin and not basketball, and she was more impressed with his musical skills than his basketball abilities. And there's the violin, well, a violin, he played the violin. Then he heads up to Vermont. His wife was ill, so she stayed back. I kind of wonder if this was supposed to be a honeymoon trip, like they got married in Fitchburg and they were heading up to Vermont to honeymoon. I'm not sure. But Lew ends up playing basketball. And so he played in January 2nd of 1907 for the first time in Vermont. He was with his Lowell teammates, and there's the box score, the game. The St. Johnsbury, the reporter covering the game for the St. Johnsbury Caledonian, raved about Lew and said that the game was the closest and most scientific played game as has been seen on the local floor this season. So it's at this point that he kind of becomes a marquee name. So the reporter from the Caledonian dubbed him the original Bucky Lew, and that nickname stuck. Here you can see that he's the first player listed with the visiting team, so it seems that he was someone that drew fan interest. Following some of those games with Lowell, he joins the Springfield, Vermont team. And so in late January, we have a game story with Lew appearing on the Springfield team, and he can see them here, there in the box, playing right back down on the left there. He helped Springfield win the game, so that allowed them to tie with Brattleboro. So I did mention earlier that there were 3 teams in the Vermont State League, and they played each other as well as other teams. But basically the way the championship was decided, it was whoever was better between those Vermont teams in those head-to-head matchups. So each one of these games was critical. So after playing with Springfield, Lew had some trouble after the game, so he was not able to stay the next town over in Charleston, New Hampshire. So what happened is, after the game, for whatever reason, Lew and some of the other players traveled from Springfield to Charlestown. They were gonna, it seems, stay overnight and then catch the next train out of town in the morning. Lew was not able to stay at the 2 inns that they tried in Springfield. And then when they tried to stay at the train shelter, the night watchman told them that they could not do that he thought they looked like burglars. So probably an early case of racial profiling there. So what happened was Lew had to walk 10 miles in the middle of a January night to Bellows Falls, and that was the place where he was able to stay. So this is obviously a sad event. Perhaps the silver lining to that is that the players he was traveling with stayed with him the whole way. They did, yes. And what's interesting about that is it was the team he just defeated. So Springfield stayed home. Brattleboro, like Lew, had to travel south to catch the train. So they stayed together that whole time. It's possible Brattleboro was recruiting him, and maybe that helped too, but either way, they all experienced a rough night. So what's next? So then Lew signs with Springfield and St. Johnsbury. So he's actually on 2 out of 3 teams in the Vermont League. So you might ask, how could he do that? Well, it sounds like the teams agreed not to play each other thereafter, and it would just be between one of them and Brattleboro to take the state honors. And you might ask why they would do that. And I think the reason why was that Lew was popular with the fans, and that if he was on their team, they would have more fan interest and sell more tickets. And as a professional enterprise, they were trying to make money, right? So it was better for the owner if fans were in the seats versus winning a championship, which maybe didn't matter as much to them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do they get paid for each game? So they're getting paid for playing like 2 different games? Or
Yeah.
just for a season?
So it varied. So Typically, they would be played per game. The New England League had a salary cap of $5 per game, so all those players were making that. However, some of the players who were from out of town had like room and board covered as well, so they got a little bump there too. I have never seen any reference to what the players in the Vermont League were making. However, most of them were not from Vermont, and I actually even saw a reference to the Brattleboro team not having any players from Brattleboro. So they were all importing players. So some were probably making more than others, depending on how talented they were, right? So Lew, as one of the players who was imported, was probably making more than the local players.
And then how did they travel between all the, is it always train?
So at this point, it is. And here, I just jumped back a slide to show the train kind of like network. In those days, it was actually more convenient to travel by train than it is now. So there was more investments in trains and railroads and things like that, whereas today all the investment is in like highways for cars. So it was actually easier to get around in those days by train. And you can see all the connections there. It might be hard to read, but basically this is like running through the middle of Vermont. And you can see Springfield and Brattleboro. St. Johnsbury is actually not called out on that, but Woodsville is over to kind of like the top right. So I feel like it's the next stop up. So it's showing a stop, but for whatever reason, there's no label on it. So that's how they get around by train. Later, when they go into the 20s, then they start traveling by car. But at this point, it's all train.
Wonder why St. James is on there.
That is interesting, right? I mean, if I'll just jump over in front of the screen real quick. Yeah.
I mean, I really think that daughter there is St. J, but,
So I thought it was, so this is Woodsville?
yeah, right.
I think this is it. So yeah, I don't know why it's called out. You can see, I think this is Vermont Central, and here's the Boston and Maine. And I heard there was another one running through St. Johnsbury, I think Champlain as well.
Right.
So, maybe it's
Yeah, that's the rail trail now, and it goes to Swan, right to pretty much to the lake, but it's not on
Yeah, that's the same here.
the,
So this might be from before, I don't know. But I don't think this is necessarily all three railroads, but I feel like this is St. Johnsbury, so it's a really interesting. So again, St. Johnsbury, Springfield, and Brattleboro. So those are the three competitors.
okay.
All right. So Lew actually played for both teams, it looks like, on the same night. And it wasn't when he was facing his old teammates. And he appears that he played well both times. So I won't read them to you. I think those are kind of readable, right? But you can see that Lew played pretty well. The one quote that stuck out to me was the Chester Advertiser saying about St. Johnsbury game that Lew is the particular star and the idol of the audience. And the very last paragraph on the story to our right talks about how Lew covered himself with glory, being the high scorer and throwing the winning basket in the last 10 minutes of play. So I saw you reacted to that, so I guess that's a sign of how low scoring the game was. He didn't throw the final basket in the last seconds of the game. It was the last 10 minutes of the game.
Well, they were still doing a jump ball after every score.
Yes. Yes, so there was a jump ball after every score, no three-point line,
After every score.
no 24-second clock. They were playing a cage on a shorter court. It was much more difficult to score.
But in the middle of that, before the game was fairly started, he banged his opponent in the face, and he pushed and tripped and slugged. I mean, it sounds more like a boxing match than a basketball.
It was very physical.
It still was.
And it was even, I mean,
Was.
yeah, yeah,
And the ankle, oh my, okay.
wasn't good. So, so Church is the man kind of that Lew replaced to become the star. So I think they might have finished 4-on-4. But, yeah, interesting. So,
I have another one on the other.
yeah,
It says he was pitted against the aeronaut, Bothwell?
yeah.
What's the word?
I feel like that means he has hang time, is what they would say today. He could probably jump. Aeronaut is probably like astronaut.
Yeah,
I confess I haven't looked it up, but that was my kind of sense of it. that he
Oh,
could
right.
jump really high and maybe hang in the air a little bit.
Take 80 flights through the air.
He didn't.
Uh,
Yeah, and if you look at the scores of this game, one is 25-23, and the other is 21, and I don't see the other one, but it's going to be less because 21 was the winning score. It's probably like 21-19 or something. All right. So the season, surprisingly, ends in controversy because everything's been so smooth so far, right? So Brattleboro knocks out St. Johnsbury, it's sad to say. So they play them 4 times, and they win 3 games to 1. So St. Johnsbury is now no longer in the running for the championship. What's interesting about the story here is it says that some people thought Brattleboro was going to let St. Johnsbury win so that they then have to play a 5th game. So let's remember that. Because what happens is Brattleboro and Springfield end up tied 2-2. So based on what I just said, you would think that they're going to play a 5th game. But Brattleboro refuses to play a 5th game, so Springfield calls themselves the Vermont state champs. And apparently the Boston Globe agreed with them because there's the picture. And then we have Bucky Lew in the, and to our right, all the way in that back right corner there.
It's interesting because if they get paid by the game, it would be to their benefit to make it be a tie game so they have to play another
Yes.
and get paid for another game.
Yes, and people thought things like this, which is why, if you remember, I mentioned that Abbott was called the gentleman, and it seemed like a strange thing to say. It was because people sometimes thought things like this. The other possibility could be that they didn't play a 5th game because someone was paying them to end it in 4 games because they had money on the game. So gambling was, I wouldn't say gambling was rampant, but it was a thing. It was a factor. Yes, it's rampant now. It's legal now. It was illegal then. And still, even today, there are some concerns about it, right? I think a number of players have been uncovered as working with gamblers, and that kind of undermines the credibility of the game. All right, so there we have it. And so that's the whole Springfield team. There's only 5 players. And 2 of those players are also in St. Johnsbury, because we have Bucky Lew, and then also Charles Church. So the 2 players in the back row, like extreme left and extreme right, played for both St. Johnsbury and Springfield. And they're both from Lowell. Charles Church was from Lowell too. Lowell High graduate, Lowell Textile graduate, first athletic director of UMass Lowell, you could say, because he was the physical director in 1909. So, another interesting fellow. All right.
Sorry, can you back up? Sorry.
Yeah, let's talk more about Vermont.
The letters after the name, so Church is the one on the left, and he must be the center.
Yes.
And RB stands,
Right back.
oh, okay, they're calling them right back, left back, right forward. And, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so they called them back because they stayed in the back. And that's also why guards were called guards.
Forward now, actually.
Yeah, so it's very different than today. So they kind of, if you think about it, the forwards are forward because they're, in those days, they were the people who would like score the points. Like think about them jumping, setting up for a jump ball, right? The center's in the middle. The forwards are in the front on the offensive side because that's who you want to score. The guards or backs are on the other side because they're protecting the basket. So that was kind of basic setup, and we still call guards today, even though it makes absolutely no sense because they're not the people closest to the basket. They're actually farthest out, even on defense.
Guarding the basket
Yes,
and guarding your own basket.
yes, exactly, yeah.
When I played, which was a while ago, it was, yeah, there were 6 players, and you couldn't go across the path.
So what do you call those players? Were you a
I
guard?
was a guard.
You were a
But
guard.
I was not a shooter.
Yeah.
I was a guard. I was guarding the basket.
So you're on the defensive side for your
That
team.
was mine.
Yeah. So I think the way that worked is, and that was kind of the rules that women played under, right? Is that you had offensive players and defensive players, and you couldn't cross sides. And I think you could only like dribble twice, or yeah, because they didn't want you to sweat. That would be unladylike, right?
And
Yeah.
partway through, by the time I graduated high school, one of the women on each side could run the full court.
Okay.
Only one. Yeah.
That is interesting. So, and something that I've learned as part of doing this research, so I did talk to Bucky Lew's granddaughter, who hated basketball for the reason you just described. You were a woman, you couldn't run around. It was not fun. So I was like, oh, wow, did your grandfather teach you how to play basketball? And she's like, no, I told him I hated it.
There's a lot of jump balls,
A lot of jump balls, yeah.
which I didn't mind because I was good at it,
Okay. Did you play in a cage?
but the cage,
No, so they had fences up
no.
for the earliest
We
days,
were,
didn't they?
way up there on that map, Richford, we were Franklin, we were right up there.
I'm going to jump back.
Tiny, yeah. Do you see Richford?
Yep.
Well, just go to the left between Richford and Swanton and Franklin, it's directly on the Canadian line.
Oh, wow.
East Berkshire, we were just west of that.
Okay.
And that's where I played, and I played all those little, and we played in Canada too.
That's interesting, because I've often wondered if Lou was this far north,
Yeah,
did he ever go across the border and play? I have not encountered that. He did, but it makes sense, right? Like-
you know, we were schools.
Yeah.
And we played other
Yeah.
schools on the Canadian side, yeah.
Interesting. All right, so finishing up on Lou, so was that it for him? No, of course not. So the New England League no longer exists. They did try to revive it from time to time, and he'd participate, but it never really stuck until 1915, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So what the stars of that day is they started their own team. So Lou starts the Lowell 5. They played in New England. Now they're driving in cars instead of taking the train, and the whole team could fit in a car like that because there's only 6 players. So it's kind of like the minivan of its day. For whatever reason, they had 3 rows, and the whole team would do that. That was kind of neat because about this time, the Klan starts coming back after Birth of a Nation comes out in 1915. And so Lou is making up his team of kind of the enemies of the Klan, basically, because that's who was in Lowell. That's who was in the cities in those days. So the Klan didn't like blacks, obviously. They didn't like Catholics either, or any immigrants. And basically, that was kind of what Lou's roster was made up of, as I say on the slide. So Lou continues to come up to Vermont, a couple of captains of games here. One, they played in Woodsville, and another played actually in St. Johnsbury, according to the caption on the right. What's interesting is the caption to the right most, you look down the bottom, says Bucky Lew, describes it as the slippery little black diamond, was clearly the favorite with the crowd. So he was still a popular player in Vermont after all that time. All right, he also becomes the first kind of man to integrate franchise ownership. So in 1915, James Gray, who had signed him, then didn't want to play him, then let him go to Haverhill, passes away. And so now Lou is now officially the man in Lowell basketball. And when the New England League tries to come back that year, he is awarded the franchise. So he's a rare black owner in sports, which is even rare to these days. I don't think there's a black owner in the NBA right now. Michael Jordan was the most recent one, and he sold that team a while ago. So more history here, very interesting. He even comes back. So in 1914, Lou had announced his retirement after breaking his leg in a game in Franklin, New Hampshire. Then he comes back with this opportunity to run a team. Being a good businessman, he comes out of retirement to play, signs himself as the sub, saves himself a few bucks, right? And he ends up playing pretty well. He's a top 10 scorer in the league, and of course, the same fan favorite that he's always been. Now he does some more college coaching. I mentioned how he was coaching in 1903. He also coached with an old PAC teammate of his, Skip Field, the Lowell Commercial College, which no longer exists. It was like a school that taught like office skills for emerging office jobs, like stenography and things like that, things that are no longer kind of applicable. Then he also coached again at Lowell Textile School in 1909 and 1922. Now the caption kind of on the bottom there talks about how he's helping out his friend Coach Church, who he talked about playing up in Vermont in 1907 with Lou, both on Springfield and St. Johnsbury's teams. So they're still buddies after all that time. and Lew is taking control of the guards and trying to help him out. So as, I guess, as the calendar turns or whatever, as time passes, college basketball gets more and more popular. The season of Lew's coaching, college coaching we know the most about is 1922. That was covered almost on a daily basis in a couple of Lowell papers. Now we're calling it Lowell Tech and not Lowell Tech still. Lew is the coach. Here's a story that appeared in a Montpelier newspaper, I think, written by a Lowell sports writer talking about the team because they're on their way up. They started the season 5-1, and they're now coming to Vermont for a 3-game road trip. Unfortunately, the road trip did not go well for Lowell. One player, they traveled with about 6 players. One caught the flu, another broke a collarbone, and they just had to kind of deal with that. They lost all 3 games. They ended up about 500 for the season. Still a good season overall. They swept BC. They beat them 2-0. They beat Boston. They beat Northeastern. They beat the other textile schools on their schedule. And according to the papers, they won an unofficial textile school championship. So you might ask, is that it for Lew? Well, maybe. So he is not in the Naismith Hall of Fame. They did send the family a letter way back in the 70s, acknowledging that he was the first black professional. However, for whatever reason, they have not seen fit to induct him as a member in the hall. And that's despite all these accomplishments that we spent the last 45 minutes or so talking about. There's the full list. He also did have an influence on greater integration. So if you know the story of Jackie Robinson, integrated Major League Baseball. He signed in 46, he played in 47 in Montreal. He played in Canada, he did not play in the United States. The Dodgers did want an integrated farm team in the US so that Robinson would have support, right? They wanted a wave of players coming up and they didn't want him to be kind of on his own. So the Dodgers had trouble locating that team in the US until they talked to a sports reporter in Nashua, New Hampshire. And he told them that their black players would be welcome there. How did he know? Well, it turns out that he was a high school star, basketball star, and when Lew came to town in the 20s, the sports writer Fred Dobin's team played at halftime of Lew's games. So he was kind of a witness to how beloved a figure Lew was, both with the press, fans, and his peers as well. So he related that to the Dodgers. They set up that first integrated farm team since the color line was established in Nashua. It was a success, although it was a generation after Lew played, and it still took a lot more work. That was really the move that really put integration in motion in both sports and society. All right, just wrapping up here in Lowell, we do have a few honors for Bucky Lew. There is a Lew Family Square downtown where the family's dry cleaning business used to be. At the YMCA, we have a plaque. We're actually doing a mural in the fall for him, which will be cool. UMass Lowell also has a plaque and an exhibit at the Songus Arena, which is where they mostly play hockey games, but sometimes play basketball games. So he's starting to get more recognition in Lowell. Like we were speaking before, we were from Lowell and I hadn't heard about Lew until a few years back. So hopefully that's going to change. He's going to be more of a known figure. And hopefully this is just the start. And of course, what about St. Johnsbury? Well, I think St. Johnsbury deserves credit too, like a lot of cities and towns and players and fans in New England do. So we had talked about how Guy Abbott played against both Matthews and Lew and never objected, right? And similarly, St. Johnsbury hosted Lew and actually welcomed him and considered him a fan favorite and a beloved figure. So it took another generation after all of this for the full integration of Major League sports, but I think this is part of the story, and St. Johnsbury and Guy Abbott deserve credit for that. And just wrapping up, a few notes on my sources. So the Encyclopedia of Pro Basketball History is really interesting. So this is kind of the history of basketball prior to the NBA, which is not something that a lot of people know much about, because people tend to think pro basketball started in the 1980s. Never mind the start of the NBA in the 40s, and this goes back even further than that. So it's pretty cool, and there's other resources out there. UMass Lowell has the Center for Lowell History. newspaper archive has a lot of digitized newspapers, which makes it much easier to research things like that these days. And also Genealogy Bank has a lot of the Vermont papers digitized and available online for searching as well. And so that's it for the formal part of the presentation, and I'll be happy to stay and answer questions and sign books if anyone's interested. But I do appreciate you coming out and listening to me, and please tell your friends about Bucky Lew.
And you have books?
I do have books, yes. I'll be happy to sign them. I'm selling for $25.
I do have, you talked about the Hall of Fame in Springfield. Have you thought about trying again? I mean, that's an impressive list. Well, maybe it's not very boring, but, you know, we have a lot better idea that we should be supporting these people.
Yes.
Recognizing these people as the word I should use.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. So we have updated the profile that the Hall of Fame references when they're considering a candidate for induction. So that helps, right? The thing that makes it a little more difficult for him is the Naismith Hall of Fame used to have an early African American pioneers direct elect committee, which meant that this committee of people considered players from way back when, those who made contributions toward integration, and was able to put people directly into the Hall of Fame without any more elaborate process. They ended up putting about a dozen players into the Hall directly, then they disbanded. They disbanded a couple years ago. Lew was always on their list, but he never made the cut. I think it's because they didn't have the full profile that I just mentioned we've since updated. So now it's up to the Veterans Committee to consider Lew. So it's a little more difficult of a process. I think it's inevitable. It's kind of just like word gets out. The problem is there's not a lot of interest in early basketball because it's so long ago and so far before the start of the NBA. So the NBA is not really promoting Lew or anything related to that. They did make a big deal, and rightly so, this year about it being the 75th anniversary of the NBA integrating, but they're not really looking any earlier than that because it's not necessarily relevant to them. It's not helping them. They're not promoting the NBA by doing that, where it was a little different this past year because they're talking about integration, they're promoting NBA, they're selling merchandise, they have a direct interest in that, not so much of an interest in this. Now the NBA doesn't run the Naismith Hall of Fame, but they are a big contributor to it, so there is certainly a lot of focus on players from the NBA, the start of the NBA, and later on when they're considering people to induct. So we're working on it. I think it's inevitable, but it'll be a process.
We All-state guys, Lowell guys, late in the 60s. I'd say we've been getting together for 40 years. A lot of years.
Yeah.
We meet at least once a year. His name is never come.
That's crazy.
It is really
Yeah.
great. Although we also, we look much beyond the 50s, looking back. So I got another gig for you if I can convince the organizer to get you in there. They love it, especially the tech guys.
Yeah, I'd love to be part of that. I mean, so we talk about the Naismith Hall of Fame not having Lew in. He's not in the UMass Lowell Athletic Hall of Fame either. So that's why you never heard of him. And I understand that some of this information is new, and it's easier for me to do the research now because these newspapers are digitized. But still, I've written 2 books about Lew going back like 4 years now. So the word's out, and UMass Lowell knows because they have recognized him in some way, but they have not seen fit to put him in that hall, and he just missed another one too.
Hank Brown. He is big in the athletic hierarchy at UMass Lowell.
Okay, yeah.
Contributor.
I feel like that'll help, right? If the alumni are behind it, maybe get more recognition for Lew there, and then when Naismith or whatever organization sees that his home school, his hometown is starting to recognize him, it should take off from there. And I am from Lowell, right? My interest in this is because I'm from Pawtucketville, so my grandparents came down to Lowell from Quebec in about the 1920s, same neighborhood that Lew was in when he was finishing up his career. Yet I'd never heard of him until I started kind of like digging into early basketball. And I was surprised to learn that there was a professional team from Pawtucketville, that would be the Pawtucketville Athletic Club that Lew started with, and that was cool. But what was even more interesting was that was the first integrated professional basketball team. And I didn't know anything about this 5 years ago. So it's not like there's a statue or something, you know? And there's still no statue, but at least there's a couple plaques here and there, so I think that'll help. But yeah, I'd love to meet those guys and talk to them and get there. And Lew's granddaughter is around and interested. She lives in the area. She would be happy, I'm sure, to get behind some of that stuff too. Yes. Yeah, so that is Lew's granddaughter, Wendy, on the left, and then great-granddaughter Kia on the right. So Wendy lives in the Boston area, and then Kia lives in Brooklyn, I think, New York area, but from time to time she'll come back too. So when there's an event, they are happy to support it and happy to do whatever they can, because you can understand that they would like to see more done for him as well. There was a push in like the 90s to get him into the Hall of Fame, and not much came from it other than the square being named for the family. But hopefully we can do better now. John Street in Lowell, so it's kind of tucked away. Do you know where the John Street garage is? It's not far from Boarding House Park, where they have a lot of concerts in the summer. Right. But it's kind of like a couple blocks in. It's not far from St. Joseph's, the Workers' Shrine either, but it's kind of on top of a parking lot. So if you see behind them, there's nothing, because the parking lot, and then in front of them is a parking garage. So it's kind of just like tucked away. I mean, it's at the site of where the family business was, so it makes sense. But just walking around downtown Lowell, you're probably not going to come across it unless you go looking for it.
Lowell is interesting in that it was segregated by religion.
In ethnicity, right?
Yeah, religion and ethnicity.
Yeah.
Centerville, Pawtuckeville.
Yeah. So you had like the Irish on one side.
That was true of Burlington.
Yeah. And
I mean, I don't know that it was, they would have called it segregated. You know, they tended to, you know, they wanted the Italians, Barry was the same. Italians together, French Canadians, Jewish people, they wanted to be together.
well,
I mean, I'm not, I know, but I just,
I played ball at early ball at the Immaculate Conception right next to it. Sorry?
Yeah.
Well, there's the Immaculate Conception, and we had a building up back with the gym and stuff. Then there was a Protestant All Saints Church here, they had a beautiful gym. None of the Protestants ever stepped foot in our gym. In all of the years I played ball in Lowell, I never was in a Protestant gym, not once.
that doesn't surprise me at all.
It was kind of interesting. And there was no, I think when I was growing up, I think the percentage of African Americans in Lowell was like 6%. So they were all up on Hale Street.
Yeah.
So it was pretty interesting, the racial, religious divisions in that city.
Yeah, so and what's interesting about the Lews is they were there before any of that. So Barzelia Lew, who was Bucky Lew's great-great-grandfather, bought a farm in what was then Pawtucketville, Drake after he finished in the Revolutionary War. So they lived in Pawtucketville when it was like rural. And then the mills happened, and Lowell happened, and spread out, and all that kind of built around them. So they were in Lowell before Lowell was Lowell. So he and his family were accepted in that Pawtucketville community, which is mostly, but not exclusively, French Canadian. Yeah. But it's like, so yeah, my grandparents came down, and that's where they settled, because they didn't speak English. So they're going to go where the French people are, because they knew how to talk to the butcher, and the person is going to help them get a job. Yeah. So that was kind of how it built up. But they were already there, and the Lews were accepted. But yeah, the population, the black population of Lowell was not significant in terms of numbers, because so what do you call it? The Great Migration. There were a couple of waves of migration of blacks out of the South when I guess they had no mobility to do so, and they had kind of given up on Reconstruction. They typically didn't come up this far north because there weren't a lot of jobs for them at that time, because that's when like the textile industry was foundering. So they went to like Chicago and New York and other places that were growing and had jobs. Even Springfield, Massachusetts had more jobs because it had a more diversified economy. They were building like guns and motorcycles and cars. But at the point when the blacks were leaving, The South, there weren't jobs in these old kind of mill cities because the textiles factories were moving south, so.
So, but you were saying he went back great-great-great-grandparents, Revolutionary War?
Yes,
So they weren't coming, they weren't Southern.
they were not, they were here. So his
They were
great,
blacks.
yeah, so his great-great-great-grandfather, Primus, was apparently born a slave, but became a free man. He was in the French and Indian War. I don't know, but I speculate that he probably took someone else's place and so got his freedom that way. So the person who enslaved him didn't want to serve, so he took that spot instead, and then he was free. And so Barzillai Lew, who was a fighter in the Revolutionary War and rumored to be at like Bunker Hill and a lot of those significant kind of battles, was born a free man and stayed that way. Barzillai, yeah.
This is fascinating.
You're welcome.
Really, really interesting.
Good, glad to hear it.
They would have played in the armory right here.
Yes, and I was looking for that, but that was built in 1912 or something. So it would have been the armory before the armory. I don't know if it was in the same spot, but they did play in the armory.
Yeah, it's the same spot.
Yeah, so it's the same spot, but older building.
That building is the newest building, which is really old.
Yeah, so I think they started that in like 1912 or something.
A lot of pollution.
Yeah.
They go along.
Yeah. But yeah, so there were no basketball arenas necessarily in those days, so they played in like halls or armories. And armory was a good spot because they had a big floor to practice drills. So it wasn't just guns, it was a place to like practice military drills, so they had like a big open floor. Not a lot of buildings from that era still exist. There is one in Fitchburg that still exists that he would have played on, and I walked through it, and it's cool. It's just like this big open hall, wood floor. The ceiling's a little tough for shooting because it's peaked, and the floor is not in great shape. It's not level, but that's what they played through. That's also why the scores are so low.
This armory, my husband, and I coached basketball. Little girls
Oh, you
basketball.
really? Okay. Yeah. All right.
And, you know, it was the rec department, rec region.
Okay.
And so we had,
Kids played there.
yeah, for whatever basketball. I coached kids basketball and I refereed, and my husband was in a rec basketball. You know, that would have been the 80s at least.
Okay.
Oh, no, it was in the 90s. Yeah, it was in the 90s. I was refereeing in the 90s.
Yeah, so I was surprised to hear they were playing with the armories because that didn't make any sense to me, but obviously it makes sense to you, and it does if you understand like what the real layout is. All right, well, I do appreciate your time and interest, and yeah, let me know. I'd be happy to talk to you.